public institutions. There's no accountability whatsoever now. There's no centralized regulatory mechanism that tries to ensure that there's like educational parity, and it makes it easier to privatize what remains of these like publicly funded schools. Anyway, Donald Trump here. We got to move soon. We're going to move in the direction of the rally. And but before I do that, here, let's take a look at the Education Department dying by executive order. Also, predictably, the executive order will still allow the Department of Education to collect debt. Shocking. Because I was like, maybe the silver lining in all of this is that you get to, maybe the silver lining in all of this is that you basically get to have, no more student loan debt. And I was, of course, I thought maybe they privatize it. They would like hand it off to like a private company to collect or whatever so they can make more money off of it. But no, they're just going to keep it. They're going to keep the one function of the Department of Education.
Executive order today to begin dismantling the U.S. Department of Education. If he can, the move, if completed, would fulfill a promise he made during his campaign. Weijia Zhang is at the White House for us. Weijia, what more do we know about this?
Well, good morning. This will largely be a ceremonial event. The order will direct the Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, to facilitate the closure of the department she heads, which has long been a rallying cry of President Trump and his supporters. In a statement, the White House said the order will empower parents, states, and communities to take control and improve outcomes for all students. And a senior administration official says the order does not impact Title I, which is a program that helps students from low-income families, student loans, or a law that ensures special education and services for students with disabilities. Republicans have talked about shuttering the Department of Education for decades, and the Trump administration has already cut nearly half of the agency's staff. But to officially close the department, it would take an act of Congress. The president is expected to sign the executive order today in a ceremony attended by several Republican governors, as well as educators and parents. Adriana.
All right, Weijia, huge change there. Thank you so much.
The president of the United States is expected to sign this executive order later on this afternoon during an event at the White House. And yes, it could have huge effects not only on schools here in New York City, but across the country as well. Important to remember that actually closing the federal Department of Education takes an act of Congress, which created it in 1979. But short of that, the president can dictate what the department does or doesn't do. The president has already slashed the department's workforce in half. New York City gets about $2 billion each year from the department to fund important programs in its schools. While we haven't seen the text of this executive order just yet, losing some or all of that money would be devastating. What could be on the chopping block? Well, the city could lose one schools, which educate predominantly low-income students, meaning the achievement gap between rich and poor students could widen. The city could...
Yeah, they don't care about that at all. That's kind of the purpose of this. Yeah, it's all... The Department of Education as like its major function is, I think it's like responsible for 10% of the overall funding, and 90% of it still comes from like local taxes. And there's a lot of issues with the way that tax structure works to begin with that exacerbates inequality, educational outcomes across the board. And outside of that, though, like a lot of the funding initiatives revolve around students with disability, low-income students, like people who desperately need desperately need this funding, and also schools who desperately need some guidance from a federal agency. And the federal agency also operates as a regulatory enforcement mechanism on schools, considering that the entire Brown v. Board of Education stuff happened and like desegregation was somewhat of a failed initiative even after that, but it still is somewhat of a failed initiative right now, even though it's not like technically legal, and schools are still fairly segregated. This all but destroys the last like protection against that sort of thing, and it's a really awful it's a really awful thing to do. Is adding any sort of setback whatsoever to the public education structure, especially when there is already incredible inequality in that on that side. So really cool stuff, really wonderful stuff. Just dismantling the government. The thing that they're doing, the reason why they're doing this pretty much is because this has been the dream of the white supremacist, white evangelical Protestant movement that Paul Weyrich tapped into with the moral majority all the way back in like the 60s and onwards, where he realized that these guys wanted to maintain segregation in schools. And that's why the school choice initiative began as well. It was a really good way to privatize schools and abolish teachers' unions. And it was like there was a lot of momentum from people in the evangelical movement because they could just like advocate for this kind of segregation by claiming it was for religious freedom. So that's the situation in front of us. They're moving in that direction so that everywhere is it's like a Betsy DeVos style paradise, like what Betsy DeVos did in Michigan. They want to do that all around the country, basically. Public institutions. There's no accountability whatsoever now. There's no centralized regulatory mechanism that tries to ensure that there's like educational parity, and it makes it easier to privatize what remains of these like publicly funded schools.
Would also lose funding to help students with disabilities. One caveat here, important to remember, Education Secretary Linda McMahon has said that she is not in favor of cutting spending on Title I programs or on those that help disabled.
Yeah, this will specifically harm rural communities as well. Those schools are insanely poor. These are their own constituents, except it doesn't matter about poor people and rural people at all. And two, it doesn't matter. They will just be like, oh, just homeschool your children. We will become an even dumber country as a consequence of this.
Students. Meal programs could also be at risk, which is significant since some students rely on schools to provide them with the bulk of the food that they eat each day. The president has spoken about closing the DOE for months now. He has said that the department wastes taxpayer dollars and is made up of, quote, radicals, zealots, and Marxists. He issued this directive to McMahon, his education secretary.
I told Linda, I hope you do a great job and put yourself out of a job. And what I want to do is let the states run schools.
Who's Americans' kids, America's school children.
And college students could also be affected. Those who receive Pell Grants and student loans could be massively impacted by today's announcement. The repercussions could be wide-ranging, and the executive order is expected to spawn lawsuits across the country. We've seen plenty of those suits already in these first couple months of the Trump administration. We're live on the Upper East Side this morning. Kurt and Tashani, back to you.
Robert, doesn't the administration need congressional approval first?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Yeah. Sorry. Say that one more time. You mean there needs to be congressional approval? That's got to be a joke, Linda. There is no more congressional approval. It means nothing. Who's going to stop them? Chuck Schumer? I laugh at that notion. Thank you.
Doesn't the administration need congressional approval first?
Yes, this requires an act of Congress. Congress created the Department of Education in 1979. Congress would have to shutter it, but this could certainly set the groundwork for that to begin happening.
All right, thank you.
Police forced to end a town hall in Illinois after heated confrontations with constituents. Pro-Palestinian protesters interrupting Democratic Congressman Sean Casten.
Sir, sit down. Show some respect for everybody who was here. Show some respect for the people who are here.
Yesterday, 7 children had to leave
People did not come here to hear you. Show some respect for the people in this district. Or I'm
what
telling
you're saying is I'm not going to get my way when my people are being slaughtered, and I want you to stop funding them.
If you would like to run for office, run for office.
That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You are the most.
Chat, we are okay. Chat, we're gonna now make our way to the Bernie rally ahead of time to link up with both AOC and also link up with AOC. Oh, are we doing the lapels? Then I should probably wear a jacket instead of this. Link up with AOC and Bernard Sanders, chat.